Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. More specifically, we're going to be discussing the Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, it's been about 3 to 4 weeks since the last Bitcoin dominance video, and a lot has happened since then. What's interesting is that some of the things that we previously talked about that were sort of not lining up in the same way that they had last cycle are now actually starting to line up in an almost identical pattern as last cycle. So we'll talk about that. If you're new to the channel, the general thesis that I set forth in early 2022 was just simply this. It's that Bitcoin will slowly reclaim market share until looser monetary policy arrives. That was the thesis. This was back when Bitcoin dominance was below 40%. Now it's up to 55%. So the thesis has been valid that Bitcoin dominance should go up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. Okay? And that has been largely correct. Bitcoin dominance in early 2022 was all the way over here at around 39% or so. Now, you might point out, and I'll just get this out of the way right now, that it technically put in a lower low in August of 2022, going into or September of 2022, going into the merge. That may be true when you look at the Bitcoin dominance, including stablecoins, right? But as I've said previously, if you look at the Bitcoin dominance excluding stablecoins, which makes sense. I mean, we're not looking at Bitcoin dominance to get an idea of what the stablecoin market is doing. We just want to know what alt Bitcoin pairs are doing. So when you look at it without stablecoins, here's an approximation of it. You can see that, in fact, Bitcoin dominance bottomed in May of 2021. And ever since then, it has, in fact, been putting in higher lows. Okay? And we've had some close calls, but it's never really stopped putting in higher lows. And in fact, the pattern that you're currently witnessing on Bitcoin dominance, excluding stables, looks really similar to this pattern over here, where you spend a little bit of time below the bull market support band for a while, and then you get back above it, and then you wick below it again, right? But then eventually you just sort of blast off to a new level. And I suspect that that's ultimately what's going to happen, but it is taking a long time. So I mentioned earlier that in the last Bitcoin dominance video that we did, Bitcoin dominance was actually about the same as it is today. But a lot has changed. And I actually pulled up the last Bitcoin dominance video. Here it is. And I just wanted to pull it up. This was from about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And in this video, you'll see that Bitcoin dominance was actually lower than it is right now. Now, that might not mean a whole lot, but there's a nuance to it that is really, really important, right? That is Bitcoin dominance right here. And this is fascinating. 54.69%. Today, it's at 55%. But look at this. The number 2 crypto by market cap, Ethereum, the ETH Bitcoin valuation in this video over here was at 0.0479. Right now, ETH Bitcoin is at 0.053. So ETH Bitcoin is actually up considerably since then, right? About 10%. Despite the fact that ETH Bitcoin is up 10% since the last Bitcoin dominance video, Bitcoin dominance is actually higher today than it was back then. Now, this is starting to really line up exactly how it did in 2019. Now, 2019 has been a comparison that I've made fairly frequently for a long time. And the reason is because in 2019, it was a pivot year by the Federal Reserve. It is the year that the Fed started to cut interest rates. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Previously, when ETH Bitcoin broke down, right? When it broke down a couple of months ago, right? When it broke down right here, what was interesting about it was that it was actually breaking down before the altcoin market broke down. You see? If you look at this wick right here, you'll see that it was getting weekly closes below the range low. The reason why that's interesting is because alt Bitcoin pairs were still holding above their range lows. And I mentioned this anomaly several times, that it was very different from last cycle. And you might say, a valid response, I don't really consider it that valid, but a valid response for some people would be to say, well, Ethereum isn't as, as important anymore, and there's other altcoins that are taking market share away from Ethereum, and so it makes sense that Ethereum is weaker. Now, guys, you know me, I've been very bearish on ETH Bitcoin for a long time, and I still do maintain a bearish bias on it for a little bit longer, not that much longer, but a little bit longer. But I will say this: despite my views that I've expressed about ETH Bitcoin over the last 2.5 years, despite the fact that I've been bearish on it since it was at 0.085 and all the way down, it's still number two. I don't think there's any other altcoin that's going to be, flipping Ethereum anytime soon. And so while I have expressed pretty negative views on ETH Bitcoin, it was still puzzling to me that the altcoin market was actually holding up better than the ETH Bitcoin valuation. And the reason I say that is because ETH tends to be the last to fall in the same way that it's the last to go up. If you remember back to 2021, there were a lot of people converting their ETH to altcoins in April and May. But the problem was that they were doing so because, as they were looking at the chart, it was that Ethereum wasn't moving. But Ethereum usually is the last thing to move, and it goes up about 2x in 2 weeks. And it's called, as I've mentioned before, the Ethereum tsunami, right? And it basically takes all that liquidity back from the altcoin market and goes up. So everyone who had converted their ETH to altcoins gets left behind, and the altcoins basically sit and watch Ethereum go. The same thing happens on the other end of the spectrum when you're in a Bitcoin dominance rally, right? Ethereum is the last thing historically to fall. And so what was really interesting is that ETH Bitcoin was falling, but alt Bitcoin pairs were not. But now everything's changed, right? Everything has changed. If you look closely last cycle, right, and this is alt Bitcoin pairs. If you look, this is total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. If you look really closely, what you'll see here, and we'll overlay ETH Bitcoin onto this chart, you will see, in fact, that ETH Bitcoin fell below support right here about 2 weeks or so after the altcoin market fell below support. It was about 2 weeks. Alt Bitcoin pairs broke down the week of June 24th, 2019. ETH Bitcoin didn't break down until the week of about July 8th when you actually look at the wicks, right? About July 8th. We can actually get it exact right here. If you look at that wick and go all the way across, you'll see right there, that's the week of July 8th. So ETH Bitcoin broke down 2 weeks after alt Bitcoin pairs did. That's important because previously it was looking like ETH Bitcoin was breaking down, but alt Bitcoin pairs were not yet breaking down. So it was kind of different. But now it's not so different anymore. Now when you look at it, ETH Bitcoin had a strong move. What's interesting about this move is we talked about this move a lot, and the fact that you have a January, February, and May pump by ETH Bitcoin in 2019. Look at that. January, February, and May. Same thing here. January, February, and May. So it's the same thing, right? And we talked a lot about this, right? That you could see some type of a move like this by ETH Bitcoin. We had seen it occur in 2019. In fact, around the same time, right? If you look at year-to-date ROI of let's look at alt Bitcoin pair or ETH Bitcoin. We're going to look at ETH Bitcoin. If you look at ETH Bitcoin on this chart, and you just look at say 2024 compared to 2019, it had a similar move around the same time in the pivot year. You see that? Very similar move, and then sort of fade a little bit, and then really start to fade as you get out into mid to late June. So, because of this move, ETH Bitcoin is now above this low from June of 2022, but it doesn't mean it's not going to eventually go back down. I think it probably will. The thing is alt Bitcoin pairs are now closer to their range low than ETH Bitcoin is. Meaning that just like last cycle, alt Bitcoin pairs could drop below the range low and head down to the actual, what I consider to be the low down here, before ETH Bitcoin makes that same move. Now, what's interesting, and I talked about this a lot, is that in 2019, this wick here by alt Bitcoin pairs occurred on a Bitcoin rally. But this wick here occurred on a Bitcoin dump. So the next move by alt Bitcoin pairs in 2019 also occurred on a Bitcoin rally, right? Look at it. Both were on Bitcoin rallies that broke alt Bitcoin pairs down, right? Right here was one, Bitcoin rallied, and then here was another one, right? Another Bitcoin rally. In this cycle, in April, it was actually a Bitcoin dump below 70K that caused alt Bitcoin pairs to dump below 0.4. And I said that what if it's playing out the reverse of last cycle, where this was Bitcoin rallies that broke it down, but in this case, it was actually a Bitcoin dump that broke alt Bitcoin pairs down in April. And once again, we just saw alt Bitcoin pairs wick below 0.4. They went down to 0.39, actually on a Bitcoin dump, not a Bitcoin pump. And it was interesting because it occurred from essentially the same level. Do you see right here where Bitcoin got rejected at around 71K? Right after that rejection, that's where alt Bitcoin pairs went below the range low. Look at it right here. Look at what happened right after Bitcoin got rejected right there off the. Look at it right here too, right? Well, I guess not a whole lot happened right there, to be completely honest. But looking at this one here, you can see that they've come back down to the range low here. You can also see over here, sort of after the first rejection, you didn't get as strong of a move down. It was sort of the second rejection from that level that actually led it down to below the range low. Once again, a Bitcoin pullback off of 70K, off of 71K, has caused alt Bitcoin pairs to go back below their range low. Now, what's absolutely interesting to me is that, and I know like a lot of people don't care about, alt Bitcoin pairs, but I can't tell you how much you can preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio during tighter and tighter monetary policy. Yes, we can cherry pick some alts if you want, by all means, that's fine. I hope you're doing well with them. But my point here is simply this, that it's a lot easier to look back and say, well, if you had bought that altcoin at the low, sure, you would have done really well. In reality, a lot of people just buy the altcoins all the way down, they sell the bottoms, and then they start buying them back. They start buying them again, going all the way up. Most of them are still not at new highs on their Bitcoin pairs. Some of them might be, but most of them are not. So when you look at this, what's absolutely interesting to me is that in 2019, alt Bitcoin pairs broke down in June, right? In June. And it's June now. Okay? So I just wonder if it's going to play out in a similar fashion. I really do. And one of the things about the summer is that social interest really seems to fall off a cliff. You can go look at the social risk and see that. And in fact, it was when social risk came back down in the summer of 2019, that's where alt Bitcoin pairs ultimately bottomed out. It was over here. And it looks like, this looks really similar, right? Social risk goes down, it bounces, then comes back down. And it's on that second drop where alt Bitcoin pairs bottom out. Same thing, right? Social risk comes down, it bounces, and then it comes back down. And you're seeing alt Bitcoin pairs capitulate once again. So when you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, and look, guys, I know everyone loves their altcoins because, the communities and all that stuff. But listen, at the end of the day, And this is a lesson that I refuse to believe for so long. For so long. Because, I mean, again, these charts aren't showing it going all the way back. It's just showing just 2017. There's been altcoins around for years before that this data isn't even capturing, right? But I'm telling you, from my experience, you can find a couple of altcoins here or there that outperform Bitcoin over multiple cycles. But for the most part, altcoins against Bitcoin are oscillators at best. Okay? Oscillators at best. And if they are oscillators at best, then why would they bottom at 0.4? When history shows, the historical record shows that they tend to bottom out around 0.25. Okay? And if I overlay a label, so we're going to put a price label right here, right? That's 25% of Bitcoin's market cap, right? September 2019. All Bitcoin pairs bottomed out at 25% of Bitcoin's market cap. Double bottom, 25% of Bitcoin's market cap in May of 2020. Deviation below it in December. Okay? Now, the next part depends on if you're a glass half full kind of person or a glass half empty kind of person. If you're a glass half full kind of person, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to switch this over to a log chart and say that altcoins oscillate between a fairly well-defined range, and that you at mania phases they top out at around parity with Bitcoin, where the altcoin market cap is equivalent to Bitcoin's market cap, right? Which is why you see it at 1 or 0.99, right? Glass half full. Glass half empty would say even altcoins are putting in lower highs against Bitcoin, because technically over here that was 1.35, and then technically here it was 1, right? Now, the counterpoint, though, for my glass half full friends would be to say, well, if you can have a deviation below the range low over here, why can't you have a deviation above it over here? So maybe they are oscillators, right? Maybe they just simply are oscillators. But my point is this, I don't really know if it's macro bleeding or an oscillator at this point. I don't think we actually have enough data to know, to be completely honest. But I would say this, I just don't think they're going to bottom here, because the historical record suggests that, they tend to go down. And if you look at other ways of measuring this, you'll actually see that it might appear like alt Bitcoin pairs have actually made no progress in a year. We first got down into this range in June of 2023, and now it's June of 2024, and we are still here. But if you don't subtract out USDT, if you just look at total 3 divided by Bitcoin, you'll see a very interesting picture. You will see, in fact, that it has been bleeding, and it just keeps on putting in lower highs and lower lows. You see that? Pretty clear picture. And every time it gets a pump, it gets rejected by the bull market support band. And it's actually getting really, really close to the point where last cycle it collapsed to the actual lows of point, down here, this was around 0.27 or so, when this is not including the subtraction of USDT. The process of Bitcoin dominance going higher and alt Bitcoin pairs bleeding, it's never really been wrong. It's just that it takes a long time to play out. And why shouldn't it? Business cycles take a long time to play out. When you look at Bitcoin dominance, it didn't top last cycle until after the Fed cut. Now, one of the things that I've said many times is that Bitcoin dominance goes up until looser monetary policy arrives. Well, guess what? It's starting to arrive. But also, last cycle, it didn't even top until 2 months after the Fed started to cut rates. So we can look at certain things, like the fact that the ECB, the European Central Bank, has already started to cut rates. If you overlay the euro area interest rates onto the chart, you'll see it. Let me see if I can Euro interest. I don't remember the ticker for it. What was it? It was Euro area. I think that's what it was. There it is. So EU. Okay. So you can see they started to cut rates, right? But the Fed has not. And if you overlay US interest rates onto this chart, what you'll notice here is that the Fed cut in July of 2019. Bitcoin dominance topped out 2 months later. What's also interesting is that the Fed cut rates 1 month after alt Bitcoin pairs broke down. I am not suggesting that Jerome Powell gives a flying hawk about your altcoins, okay? What I am suggesting is that if alt Bitcoin pairs were to break down, it would be suggestive that other parts of the economy are actually starting to slow a little bit, right? And the consumer is starting to weaken a little bit, right? Remember, it doesn't mean that, you know, you're instantly going to have like, you know, crazy negative real GDP or anything like that. It's just a sign that monetary policy is starting to take hold. In fact, when alt Bitcoin pairs broke down in June of 2019, the stock market still went up for a while after that before it actually started to show weakness. And that didn't happen until the pandemic hit. So again, you know, the crypto market is not the stock market. You could make the case that Bitcoin is more closely tied to the stock market today than it was in 2019 because you have, you know, you actually have these ETFs. But the reality is that alt Bitcoin pairs are at a very similar level that they were at in June of 2019. And we know that alt Bitcoin pairs dropped, and then 1 month later, the Fed cut. The Fed did not cut because they cared about your altcoins, right? We know that. So why did the Fed cut? Well, the economy was showing some level of weakness back then. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't an immediate recession, right? But it was showing some weakness. And that could be seen through things like US bankruptcies, for instance, right? If you were to look at bankruptcies in the United States back in 2019, you will see that they were starting to go up a little bit. Right here, right? You can see bankruptcies were starting to go up a little bit. And then that was right around the time the Fed started to cut. Okay, look at bankruptcies today. They're lower than they were in 2019, but the angle of attack is a hell of a lot higher, right? It wouldn't take much longer for this to actually be above 2019 levels, which is why you see other areas already starting to cut rates because they see the rate of change on this stuff. Okay? It's not the absolute value that matters. It's the derivative. And that's what you have to be more concerned about. Not the absolute value, but the derivative. So when you look at where we are today, right? I mean, certainly bankruptcies are going up, but we actually just hit a pretty important level, I believe, in the labor market, and that's the unemployment rate, right? I mean, it's still relatively low under the historical context, but we hit 4%. I do wonder if hitting that 4% threshold is going to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates sometime later on this summer. If you were to look at the current market probabilities, the market right now, let me reload this to see if it's updated since earlier, because a lot can happen in just a few hours. But it looks like the market is suggesting that the first rate cut, this is not even really loading right now that well. We'll come back to it in a minute. I believe the market is expecting a rate cut. It was previously expecting a rate cut sometime this summer. Is it in July? It's not expecting one in July, at least not at the current time. September? No, even September. Well, I guess technically the collective probabilities here would still suggest a rate cut. You know, because the odds of staying at 5.5% in September are less than 50%, right? So the odds of at least a cut 25 basis points or more, maybe 50 basis points, is greater probability by September. But I do wonder if you get, you know, we got the unemployment rate print at 4%. We have, we have bankruptcy starting to move up a little bit more. We also have the ECB and the Bank of Canada cutting. I don't know. Can the Fed actually make it until September? It's possible. But I'm telling I'm basically saying if you, let's say this, like if you get a weak inflation print next week, and then you get another bad unemployment rate number, or maybe next month if the unemployment rate comes in at 4.1%, right? And if inflation looks like it's really starting to go down, and the unemployment rate looks like it's really starting to go up, then there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Fed to cut. Just like there's a lot of pressure on the ECB and the Bank of Canada to cut, and they have. So again, we can see these probabilities change based on more incoming data that might tell a different story. So I still look at something like Bitcoin dominance, and it's been a hard journey. It's been a really long journey. In some ways, I regret spending as much time as I have on it. In other ways, I think it was the right thing to do. But when I look at this, I see something that since December of 2022 has only had 2 weekly closes below the bull market support band in a year and a half. 2 weekly closes below it in 1.5 years. It's remarkable. I see a chart where monthly Heikin-Ashi candles have been nothing but green since December of 2022. It's fascinating to me, honestly, how so many people have faded this entire move by Bitcoin dominance and acting constantly like it's breaking down, when the historical record shows you that it's basically just been going up for over a year and a half. But because everyone gets so drawn into these short-term moves, they focus on these periods because they dream about alt season, right? And Bitcoin dominance just keeps on going up. The reality when it comes to alt season, for people that really want alt season, is that the way this historically works is that there's only 1 year where alt Bitcoin pairs durably outperform, and that's the post-halving year. You see this big red candle on Bitcoin dominance? That was 2017. 3 green candles in a row. The next red one, the post-halving year, 2021. What if you just get 3 green candles in a row? So basically, and I've experienced this before, you come into crypto, you get your alt season, and then you spend the next 3 years dreaming of alt season while Bitcoin just reclaims market share. By the end of it, a lot of people that used to like altcoins become Bitcoin maxis right here, never want to touch altcoins again, and in the post-halving year, Bitcoin dominance drops again after everyone's been converted to a Bitcoin maxi. And that's kind of how this stuff plays out, because a lot of people just get so discouraged because they keep seeing their altcoins bleed back to Bitcoin. Now, you could point to some of the new meme coins that have outperformed. Even some of the altcoins from last cycle have done relatively well, but even the ones that have done well are still at lower highs, A lot of them are. I was looking at BNB Bitcoin, because that one was actually starting to pick up a little bit recently, but it still is really far down. I mean, essentially what it did was it went all the way up to around 20,000 sats. And I was very vocal over here that it's likely going to drop like a rock, and then it dropped all the way down to 5,000 sats. Now it's back up to 10,000. But it's still well off its high, right? If you go through the list, ETH Bitcoin, I still contend. What if it's just doing what 2019 did? And if it is, that just means it's going to be back to the range lows within the next, 3 to 6 weeks or so, which I know a lot of people are probably not counting on. But monetary policy has not changed in the United States. And we know that even when it did change in 2019, it still took 2 months after that before ETH Bitcoin actually bottomed. If you look at other random altcoins like Theta Bitcoin, right? Look at this one. What has this one been doing? Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes they get pumps, but, so what? So what? Still down 90% against Bitcoin. Look at Bitcoin. What do you say? I mean, this is one of those alts where, it just keeps on putting in new lows. Now you might say they're relics, right? But this is the point, is that they all become relics at some point, is the reality, to some degree, right? At least most of them. Maybe a few haven't, but most of them become relics. That doesn't mean they can't pump in the next phase where Bitcoin dominance goes down. But when you think about the thesis of preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio back in early 2022, even though we were about to enter into a bear market, you still would have been better off with Bitcoin than Polkadot, right? I mean, look at this. Polkadot is down from the high, it's down 91% against Bitcoin. Look at the inverse of this. Look at the 1 over dot Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin dot valuation. So the last time I did this video where I showed you the comparisons, you can see where it was. Now look at it. The way this works. Here in May of 2021, 1 Bitcoin would have gotten you about 1,000 dot. And then I showed an example. Then in February 2022, 1 Bitcoin got you 2,000 dot. Then in February 2023, 1 Bitcoin got you 3,500 dot. Then in February 2024, 1 Bitcoin got you 6,700 dot. Now in June of 2024, 1 Bitcoin gets you 10,000 dot. This is why Bitcoin dominance matters. You can cherry pick any altcoin you want to tell me why I'm wrong, but this is the reason. And again, while you can cherry pick, and a lot of people say, well, you're just cherry picking relics. Guys, I would argue the opposite. If the collective altcoin market is bleeding against Bitcoin, which you can see pretty clearly, right? I mean, if this is the collective altcoin market bleeding against Bitcoin, then the cherry picking is reserved for the people that have been bearish on Bitcoin dominance, because you're going against the general trend where the entire altcoin market is bleeding against Bitcoin. So the cherry picking is reserved for the people that are finding alts that are outperforming Bitcoin. A majority of altcoins are underperforming Bitcoin over the last couple of years. Yes, if you cherry pick a 3-month window, you can find some that are doing well, but the ones that are doing well now are likely not doing well that long ago. Look at some of the ones that were doing well a couple of years ago, right? Look at Matic Bitcoin. Matic Bitcoin was one that was loved by a lot of people in 2022. Look at this move. I put out a video, one of the Bitcoin dominance videos. We said, look, guys, it's probably just going to get rejected by the range high, a double top. Now look at it. Look at the inverse of 1 over Matic Bitcoin. And look, you can see I showed you this once upon a time as well. Back in February 2023, 1 Bitcoin got you 16,000 Matic. The last time I showed you this in February 2024, 1 Bitcoin got you 51,000 Matic. Today, it gets you 104,000 Matic. This is why Bitcoin dominance matters. If you were to look at AVAX Bitcoin, it had a great pump off of the range low, but I recognize this pattern. This was the exact same pattern that we saw Dash Bitcoin do back in the prior cycles, where if you look closely, you will see identically that pattern. Is it not the same thing? Could it deviate and become something else? Sure, right? But what happened with Dash Bitcoin, it set a low in the bull market. It then bounced off of that low at the very end of the pre-halving year. Same thing that AVAX Bitcoin did. At the very end of the pre-halving year, it bounced off of the low that it set in the bull market. It had a really nice bounce, but then by Q4, Dash Bitcoin was breaking that low. Look at AVAX Bitcoin. Really great bounce, slowly bleeding. Is there not a good chance that by October, AVAX Bitcoin is back down to the range low? I would say a pretty good chance. And if you look at 1 over AVAX Bitcoin, you can see what I was showing previously. The last time I showed you this chart, 1 Bitcoin got you 1,400 AVAX. Today, it gets you 2,000 AVAX. This is why Bitcoin dominance matters. You look at ADA Bitcoin. ADA Bitcoin keeps on putting in lower lows, right? And this is one that's gotten me in a lot of trouble with the Cardano community, because I've said for a long time that this is the outcome, but no one wants to believe it, you know? And again, again, it's not personal for any of these altcoins. It's not personal for Matic or for Avalanche or for Aave or for whatever. It's just this is what happens in the market cycle. You get 1 year where these things do well, and then you get 3 years where they bleed back to Bitcoin. Don't get mad at me. I'm just the messenger, right? But for everyone that has criticized the ADA Bitcoin valuation, I would humbly say this. Today, you could have gotten more ADA for your Bitcoin than at any point since 2020, right? So was it ever wrong of me to say that ADA Bitcoin was bearish, right? Was it justified that people got all upset about it? And here we stand. And it put in a new low today. In fact, it went all the way down to 621 sats, right? That doesn't mean it can't bounce occasionally. I mean, look, this is what it does. It sometimes bounces and it pulls people in, and people think it's the bottom, and then you wait another 3 months or so, and then it puts in a new low. In fact, this pattern looks really similar to what Aave Bitcoin did. Look at what Aave Bitcoin did. It was a little bit stronger than the ADA Bitcoin valuation in the sense that it actually did get a bounce back up to the bull market support band. But it's still just coming right back down. So that's the thing. Like, I mean, I look at something like ADA Bitcoin. I'm like, I can look at it in a practical way and say, well, look, I mean, if it bounces, I'm sure people would come out of the woodworks to say something about it. But it doesn't mean it's going to break through the 20-week moving average, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that. In fact, you can see that the 20-week SMA is getting really close to where it previously broke down, or where it previously set that low. So again, it's all about sort of a rotation, right? You know, this week, you know, or last week, or a couple weeks ago, you saw Aave Bitcoin pump, right? At some point at some point earlier today, we saw ADA Bitcoin pumping. We did. I know you have to squint to see it, believe me, you do. But you see that wick? It was starting to move. And then the labor market data came out. And then it got pushed back down. And if you look at 1 over ADA Bitcoin, what do you notice? Same thing as everything else. In 2021, 1 Bitcoin got you 16,000 ADA. Today, 1 Bitcoin gets you 155,000 ADA. This is why Bitcoin dominance matters, right? All you had to do in 2021, early 2022, was just say, all right, Fed's going to be tightening monetary policy. We're going to go into high interest rates. Preserve the portfolio, preserve this associated valuation on my portfolio by sticking with Bitcoin. I can weather the storm, but guess what? Bitcoin's going to hit a new all-time high before most of these altcoins do, if they ever do. Today, had you done this back in 2021, you could literally get 10 times, almost 10 times the amount of ADA. And all you had to do was stick with the king. Stick with a lower risk asset and get a better return. Doesn't sound so bad, right? Lower risk, better return, sign me up. It's the same thing, right? Solana. I don't have any problem talking about Solana. I was vocal about it over here, that it was going to be breaking down. You know? Back when it was at 0.039 or 0.0039. And this is what I really struggle with these sort of macro theories, is that inevitably there's always like a few altcoins that absolutely get demolished in the bear market, right? And if you don't believe me, right, I mean, look at say like .USD, even .USD, which we know has not been doing well, and we saw what .Bitcoin pair looks like. But look at .USD, even though it's been abysmal, it only dropped 93% in the bear market, right? From right here, from up high, the high in 2021 to the bear market low, it dropped about 93%. Only 93%, a modest 93%. Now look at Solana USD. Look at this one. Look what it dropped by. 97%. So this is what happens, right? What happens is you get a few that get wrecked a lot more than sort of the collective altcoin market, right? Solana went down 97%. But if you were to look at something like Total 3, it didn't go down 97%. It only went down 74%. But occasionally you get some that drastically underperform in the bear market year, like Solana did, and then you get a crazy pump on its Bitcoin pair later on, and therefore everyone sort of laughs and mocks the Bitcoin dominance view. But in reality, most of these people doing that are not the people that just bought it right here, right? It's the people that bought it all the way down, sold the bottom, and then started to buy it as it went back up, right? But even in this case, it's still a lower high. I'm not saying it's possible that it could develop into something more, but it's still a lower high, right? I mean, so even if you did go with the Bitcoin dominance view back in 2021 and you just stuck with Bitcoin over Solana, you're still doing better, right? Look at 1 over the Sol Bitcoin pair. So this is the Bitcoin Solana valuation. So in December of 2021, one Bitcoin got you 230 Sol. Today, one Bitcoin gets you 430 Sol. What happens is that, this is what happens, right? Some alts get hammered a little bit harder than the others, and then they get a big bounce. People only talk about those when criticizing, the Bitcoin dominant stuff. But in reality, it's still a lower high, right? So I think, it'll be really interesting to see what plays out here because Bitcoin dominance is still above its bull market support band, right? Still above it. The bull market support band range is now it's actually at 54%. And what's fascinating about this is that if you look at the prior range high, it was basically Bitcoin dominance broke out and then came back down to the prior resistance, held it as support at the bull market support band. You see that? Now look at this here. You see this where it broke out right there? It came back down to test this region as support, the same region that it had a really hard time breaking through for so long. You see that? Now it's holding it as support as the bull market support band gets to that level of 54%, which was the level that it struggled to durably break through from October of 2023 until April of 2024. What if it's the same thing, right? What if it's just slowly gathering itself and just to continue to go higher, right? To continue to go higher. One of the ways that you get alt season, if we just think about it practically, retail has to show up in mass, right? If you have a bag of altcoins and you want to see them go up in value a lot and you get where you get the Bitcoin dominance going down, doesn't it stand the reason that you need a ton of new people coming into crypto? Makes sense, right? In fact, if you look, let's go over to the workbench on the website. If you look at the Bitcoin dominance, we're going to overlay Bitcoin dominance. We'll just look at it without stable coins, and we'll look at it just right here. If you look at the Bitcoin dominance, and we overlay the social, let me see if I can find it, the social risk. When Bitcoin dominance goes up, social risk is going down or staying at low levels, right? When social risk is going up, Bitcoin dominance is going down. You need people to come in mass to make Bitcoin dominance really durably go down. If people aren't here, there's just too many altcoins spread around that Bitcoin dominance is still going to go up. You might say, well, Bitcoin dominance should go down because there's more and more altcoins. You can print another 10,000 altcoins. It's not going to magically create enough more, a lot more people that are going to go buy those altcoins. It just dilutes the money going into the other altcoins, and so each one is getting less and less market share. But the people that buy Bitcoin or stick with Bitcoin, that's actually usually goes up because people just kind of convert to becoming a Bitcoin maxi the longer they are in crypto. Again, I'm not, right? I think Bitcoin exists in a class of its own, but I also think that you can make a lot of money in the altcoin market, and I've seen what happens when alt season actually occurs. But the problem for the people that keep declaring alt season is that this is alt season when Bitcoin dominance drops like a rock in 2017. 2021, it dropped like a rock. These are alt seasons. This here, where it's just going up, that's not alt season. That's where Bitcoin is going up, and it's just dragging the altcoin market with it, the ones that want to participate. In reality, a lot of them aren't even participating. I mean, you got some of these altcoins that are closer to their lows than they are to their highs. Bitcoin is right at its prior all-time high of 69K, right? Right, it's at 69,420. ADA, closer to low than the high. Matic, closer to the low than the high. DOT, closer to low than the high. XRP, closer to the low than the high. You can go through the list, guys, right? A lot of these alts are closer to the lows than they are to the highs. There are some that are closer to the highs, but you have to cherry pick them, right? I don't have to cherry pick these. It's just the collective altcoin market is bleeding back to Bitcoin. Now, one point of criticism is that total 3 includes larger market cap alts that have been bleeding more than the lower market cap alts, and therefore the lower market cap alts are getting a bad rap, even though it's mostly coming from the higher market cap alts. Well, there's others divided by Bitcoin, which is everything outside of the top 10 divided by Bitcoin. When you look at this, it's actually just been going down ever since this year began. I mean, the high was put in the last week of December or the first week of January. Ever since then, the others Bitcoin valuation has been going down. And I said previously, if you look at others Bitcoin, what you will in fact notice is that last cycle, it dropped 60%. It then rallied 60%. And then right as rate cuts arrived, it dropped another 60%. Others Bitcoin here, it dropped 60%. It then rallied up 60%. And then what if it just drops another 60% right as those rate cuts arrive? I know I've expressed this view a lot of times. I know people might, just roll their eyes at it. But look, does this chart look like it's that impressive? It just keeps zigzagging its way down, right? So I think it makes sense to look at this stuff. And by the way, others Bitcoin almost just took out this prior low. It got really, really close. So, look, if you want alt season to occur, you have to see retail come back. But when you look at say, YouTube views for all these different crypto YouTube channels, remember before I was only looking at a few, and people were like, well, you need to look at a lot more. I've added in, we got like 30 or something here. Look at them. It's so low right now. Like, where is everyone? In 2021, we were averaging 3 to 4 million views a day. Now we're averaging less than 1 million views a day collectively. Right? The reason alt season occurred is because it went up like crazy, but this just keeps on going down. You can't have alt season if retail's not here, which means that Bitcoin dominance can keep on slowly going higher until retail actually does come back. But the problem is that last cycle, retail didn't come back until after the Fed cut rates. And there are instances where after the Fed cuts rates, retail still doesn't come back for a while. It depends on how far the Fed goes before they cut. So I look at the Bitcoin dominance chart. I still think it's going to 60%. What can I say? That's my view. I think 60% can still happen. And what's fascinating to me, again, as I pointed out earlier, last time I did this video, I need to plug my laptop in. Last time I did this video, Bitcoin dominance was at 54.7% or so. But ETH Bitcoin was a lot lower. So now you have Bitcoin dominance at around the same level, slightly higher, where ETH Bitcoin is 10% higher. If ETH Bitcoin does follow 2019 and goes back to the range lows and goes to lower lows, while alt Bitcoin pairs lead the way, that's how you see Bitcoin dominance go to 60%. ETH Bitcoin still looks really similar to 2019. Doesn't it? It looks really similar to me. And now it honestly makes a hell of a lot more sense because you now have alt Bitcoin pairs maybe breaking the range lows before ETH Bitcoin. The other thing I've told you guys to look out for is blue chip dominance, Bitcoin plus ETH dominance to get a weekly close above 73%. We're almost there, right? You can see last cycle, it was at 73%. The week of June 24th, that was when alt Bitcoin pairs broke down, the week of June 24th. We are almost there, guys. I mean, we are at 72.81%. We're almost there. I've said to look at Bitcoin dominance plus USDT dominance, that it is likely going to be breaking out. And you can see that last cycle it had a high and it swept the high, came back down and then went up. Same thing's happening, right? High, sweep the high, come back down, then go up. I thought we were already going up, but then we had the whole spot ETF stuff for ETH. That's coping, I get it. But it still doesn't mean it's not going to just go right back up. So what if it got delayed by a month or two? Monetary policy hasn't changed. It can still go up. If you look at, what was it all? USDT dominance. Still doing what it always does, right? Even ETH dominance. You know, I mean, yes, it had a crazy pump. It's still a lower high. Dominance excluding stablecoins. Still looks on track to me. And you know, I mean, I don't know when it's gonna, if it, I mean, it doesn't have to, but assuming it goes back up to the top of this trend line here, if it were to do it in July, it would put it at 64%. This is excluding stables, right? The 6%, you add 6% to Bitcoin dominance, including stables, that gets you to 60%. Okay, if it takes it until September, it's just 65. It's just a little bit more. It's 0.5% higher. But that's how you get there. And it looks really similar to this, right? You go below it, you get back above it, hold it as support, and then blast off. Or below it, get back above it, hold it as support, and then sometime in the future, blast off to the top up here, is my guess. You can look at dominance excluding stables on the website too, and just kind of see. It's just been going up for a long time. The unemployment rate came in at 4%, right? And we actually saw, though, it was, while that sounds bad, I mean, there's other parts of it that sound okay. I mean, the establishment survey looked pretty good, still added a lot of jobs according to that. Household survey looked a lot worse. It's hard to know which one's right. But the outcome was that the long end of the yield curve went up, right? Back above the bull market support band, holding as support. The dollar, same idea. If you look at the dollar, looks like the 10-year yield, doesn't it? Same thing. I've said this before. Because other central banks are going to be cutting before the Fed, I think it's going to be upward pressure on DXY to go higher. Because other economies are weaker than the United States, therefore they have to pivot sooner. That's why I've been bullish on the dollar. I mean, a lot of people have been bearish on the dollar, but I mean, it's been going up. Really, it's been putting in higher lows since July of 2023. And it just keeps on slowly going up. This is not one I have a ton of conviction in. You know, I could see it also breaking down. But if it does, it still doesn't mean that alt Bitcoin pairs won't break down. I think that they're going to break down either way. But it does go to show that this whole process has been playing out. It's a very, very slow process. And I think some of the reasons why this stuff is hard is because, you know, I put out a video and people expect it to be reflective of what's going to happen tomorrow, right? So if I put out this video and then if Bitcoin dominance were to dump, then, you know, people might get upset. But it's not a reflection on what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a reflection on what's been happening and what's likely going to happen for the months to come until the Fed pivots. And even then, it still might take a little while, as it did last cycle. So there's a lot of things to look at, right? We'll continue to follow all this stuff. But I think the first thing is to see a weekly close by alt Bitcoin pairs below 0.4. I don't know when it's going to happen, but that is what I would look for. And if we see it go below that and hold, then I imagine it'll do the same. I think it'll lead ETH Bitcoin, and ETH Bitcoin will go down too. And if alt Bitcoin pairs break down to the range lows, and ETH Bitcoin goes back down and puts in a new low, that's how you see Bitcoin dominance go to 60%. That would get you there. And that's still what I consider to be the most likely outcome, even if it's not the most liked view. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I think that's mostly covered everything. These are just my views, guys. I could be wrong about it. Just because I've been right about dominance doesn't mean I will continue to be right. Like, it's always possible that the high is already in and I'm wrong about it starting now. But I still think there's a compelling case to be made that it's going to go higher. And especially when you look at individual alts. I mean, you can see a lot of them just keep on putting in new lows. Like Dot Bitcoin just put in a new low today. Matic Bitcoin put in a new low today. ADA Bitcoin put in a new low today, right? A lot of them they just keep on putting in new lows. So, for me, I don't have any issue with this view. I just think that, you basically just get a new class of meme coins minted every few months. So people just focus on those and they're like, well, these are outperforming Bitcoin. And then 6 months from now, they just focus on new meme coins. And the old meme coins are just like no one cares about anymore. They just pivot to the new ones to say why those are more important. But these are the views. And it's interesting because you see the same phenomenon happen across different asset classes. Look at the Russell bleeding to the NASDAQ. Same idea. You see that? The Russell is breaking down against the NASDAQ. It's pretty eye-opening when you see it. Rivian. Tesla valuation. It's actually going up temporarily, but it was breaking down not too long ago. And it's right at the bull market support band. So we'll see if it gets rejected there. There's a good chance we'll see a lot of volatility coming out of these EV companies really, really soon. Lucid Tesla. Same idea, right? I mean, it just keeps on breaking down to new levels. So, I think it is worthwhile to think that alt Bitcoin pairs could break down. And if and when they do, it doesn't take long to find the range lows. A couple of months, right? So let's see if it happens. Last cycle, it happened in June when people were checked out for the summer. Maybe it'll happen this summer too. Maybe it happens in June. I'm not married to that idea. It could be July, could be even later, right? After the last halving, we saw alt Bitcoin pairs bounce for a while, but we also had better monetary policy conditions. Today, we don't, so I still think they're going to bleed. So if they bleed, remember, it can take place really quickly to the range lows. And then that, I think, is where Bitcoin dominance will finally top out. But I don't think we are there yet. I think we have a little bit further to go. And I think that staying in Bitcoin does help preserve the Satoshi valuation. Remember, last cycle, if you look at the Bitcoin dominance, or if you look at Bitcoin USD bull market support band, remember last cycle, Bitcoin did not fall below the bull market support band until after Bitcoin dominance had topped. Okay? If you look at Bitcoin dominance, you will see that Bitcoin dominance topped, and then right after it topped, Bitcoin fell below the 20-week SMA because all that liquidity had been sort of absorbed. That's why I say Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio helps preserve the Satoshi valuation. It's not that Bitcoin can't go down. It's just that as long as you believe in the Bitcoin dominance rally, then Bitcoin's going to outperform most of the altcoin market. And if it plays out like last cycle, which there's no guarantee that it does, it would theoretically mean that Bitcoin dominance could go close to 60% before it breaks below the bull market support band, right? So if you see Bitcoin dominance at 60%, and Bitcoin USD is still at the same valuation or lower, then that could be a warning sign because it was last cycle. But that's the way you play it, right? Bitcoin heavy until the Bitcoin dominance rally is theoretically over. It normally doesn't end until the Fed pivots. The Fed hasn't pivoted yet. They're probably going to pivot soon. And once they pivot, I will pivot on my Bitcoin dominance views. Plus or minus a couple of months. Remember, it wasn't immediate last cycle. The Fed pivoted in July, and then 2 months later, Bitcoin dominance topped. So it's not an exact science, but it's close enough, right? If you can ride the trend for 3 years, does it matter if you rode it for 2 years and 10 months or 2 years and 11 months? I mean, if you can ride the trend for 3 years, then you've done a good job, right? If the purchasing power of your Bitcoin to buy altcoins has gone up so much that, it doesn't matter if you time it exactly. And I'm not suggesting that you should go convert your altcoins to Bitcoin now. I mean, if you've waited this long, I don't know what you were waiting for. I'm not suggesting that, because there's a good chance that you convert an altcoin that doesn't go down against Bitcoin. My suggestion is just simply this. In the future, when the Fed starts to advertise they're going to be, raising rates really high and going through quantitative tightening, there's a good reason to think Bitcoin dominance is going to go up, especially when it's at high levels, right? Especially when it's at low levels, when it's down here. When it's up here, there's a reason to think it'll go down. When it's down here, there's a reason to think it's going to go up. So that's where I stand on the matter. Those are my views on Bitcoin dominance. I hope you enjoyed it. We will wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. The thumbs up really does help. So please click the like button. Also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. And I will see you guys. By the way, guys, last thing. I'll see you guys next time. But remember, I don't yet know if it's going to play out like 2019 or not. Okay, I wanted to add this too. There were lower highs in 2019. We are sort of seeing that now as well. There's no guarantee it plays out the same way. But if it does, then, let's say it like this. If you get a big drop back to the bull market support band in the next couple of weeks, then it opens the door for, the 2019 comparison. Okay? If we break out, then it removes that sort of analog. Okay? I can't know if it's going to play out like that or not. I do know that so far, Bitcoin has not put in a higher high. That doesn't mean it won't. In fact, if it were to put in a higher high, it would probably go a long way in breaking alt Bitcoin pairs down, because that's what broke alt Bitcoin pairs down in 2019 was a Bitcoin rally. The only reason I'm somewhat skeptical of that view is that so far we keep seeing these altcoins go back to the range lows on Bitcoin dumps, not Bitcoin rallies, right? So that's why I'm like, I don't know if it's going to play out like that, like the same way that it did in 2019 in that regard, because, back over here in May, it was on a Bitcoin rally. And then in June, it was on a Bitcoin rally. They got it back to the range lows. Here, this was a Bitcoin dump, and then this was a Bitcoin dump. So again, I don't know if it's going to play out the same way or not. I think that the general process is there. I don't know if it's going to be on a Bitcoin rally or a Bitcoin dump. I still think Bitcoin's a better play than a lot of the altcoin market. I also think Bitcoin dominance could very well top before Bitcoin falls below the 20-week estimate. I'm not married to that idea, though. We have seen things like Lucid Tesla valuation go down even after Tesla fell below its 20-week estimate. So again, it's not an exact science. It's just something we saw last cycle. But I did want to at least comment on that, because I've had a lot of people asking, about Bitcoin USD and I think a lot of people are wondering, all these spot ETF flows are coming in, but you're not really seeing price break out. And I think look, for first of all, for every buyer that you're seeing on there is someone selling their Bitcoin. I think to some degree that, it is a reflection that the altcoin market is just getting beaten down so much, because I think for a long time people were just converting their alts to Bitcoin and that was helping. Now there's less of that, because the purchasing power of the altcoins is just a lot less. So you get a lot less Bitcoin when you make the conversion for a lot of the altcoins. And that might be a reason why Bitcoin hasn't broken out up here yet. But I would say that if it can't break out and it just ends up putting in a lower high like 2019, then that comparison becomes really useful. Okay. Really, really useful. But at this point, it's still too early to know. Okay. It's still too early to know. And I don't want to be deterministic about it. And I think I came into this, to be completely honest, I think I came into it being very deterministic about it being this. But I do get things wrong. And so I don't want to say that it has to be like that. We could see it do something different, right? We could see it, play out in a different manner. And in fact, I would expect, things to play out slightly differently. It's not like it's going to be an exact science or an exact replica of what it did last cycle, right? We know that. I'm just saying that if it can't put in a higher high, then it does call into question that 2019 rally. And if it puts in a higher high, then it still doesn't mean that it can't be the 2019 rally, but maybe it just starts at a higher price. Even last June, in fact, we actually saw Bitcoin go back up to the prior high. We swept the high, and that could still be a valid comparison if Bitcoin is able to go back up to the prior high. But, so far it hasn't been able to do that. But last cycle, when it did that, it didn't really make that move until about mid-June, right? And now it's only June 8th. This weekly candle back up here was mid-June, and then it hung around those highs until mid-July. So I don't want to completely discredit that idea at this point. I think both ideas are potentially valid. We'll see which one plays out. The great thing is that, I express these opinions. I don't trade any of this stuff. I just trade the risk metric, and I've just stuck with Bitcoin because I thought Bitcoin dominance was going to go up. I just want to say again that if Bitcoin dominance goes to 60% and Bitcoin USD is still above the bull market support band, that could be the signal that it might go below it. Right? That's what happened last cycle. But I don't know where the price of Bitcoin is going to be exactly. That's just what I would be looking at. I think it makes sense to be hedged the other way, right? I mean, I think it makes sense to, and I've said this for years, right? Bitcoin gives you exposure to the potential upside while minimizing your downside risk. It's not that Bitcoin can't go down. If it goes down, in fact, back over here when Bitcoin USD went down, Bitcoin dominance went up. All right, Bitcoin dominance was going up while Bitcoin USD went down. So that's why I've said for a long time, if you're holding a lot of altcoins and you keep on cheering for Bitcoin dominance to break down, I almost wonder if you got to be wondering what you're cheering for, because under similar monetary policy conditions in 2019, once Bitcoin broke below its 20-week SMA, it was hell for altcoins. Even though they went up on their Bitcoin pairs, that was a small consolation prize because they were bleeding out on their USD pairs a lot. So, I know a lot of people want alt season, but that doesn't normally come until the post-halving year. So if you see Bitcoin go below the 20-week SMA, or if you see Bitcoin dominance go below the 20-week SMA and hold it, that's probably not a good thing for your altcoin on its USD pair. It might be okay for its Bitcoin pair, but I've learned that most of you guys just care about the USD valuation. So if you're cheering for Bitcoin dominance to drop, just be careful what you wish for, because when it did the same thing under similar monetary policy conditions in 2019, alt USD pairs did not do well, even though their alt Bitcoin pairs did. We'll wrap it up now. I'm done. I don't know how long the video has been. It's probably been too long, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye.